Welcome to the real world.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone who joined us in this webinar on the European human rights system and what we can do through advocacy through that system. We are very pleased to see so many people online. Those who have their microphone open, please close your microphone, mute yourself so I don't hear myself talking. We're very happy to see so many participants from all over the world, from different countries. Okay, I think we are there. So whoever is not muted, please mute yourself. Unless we will do it, otherwise we will do it for you. So very pleased to see so many people. We hope you had a nice summer break. You could enjoy some vacation and you are not suffering from the scorching heat as we do here in Zurich in Switzerland. It will soon be over, but it's quite exhausting right now. So welcome to the webinar, and let's see what we have on the menu for you today. As the title indicates, today we will talk about the European Human Rights System, in short EUHR, and its various mechanisms which we can use as civil society organizations, international NGOs for policy dialogue and advocacy on various issues of concern. We will take you through our latest guidance paper, which we have published on that matter. And we will not just talk about theory and present like complicated graphs and tables, but we will also share best practices from two Helvetas countries. And we're very happy that colleagues from Albania and Laos will be joining us today to talk about their practical experience when engaging with those mechanisms. You will learn how to use the guidance paper, which has been shared together with the invitation to this webinar, and there will be plenty of time for discussion for your questions and remarks. As usual, in the end, we will just tell you how you can get support from the head office from Helvetas Switzerland around these issues. Your webinar team today, as usual, our main facilitator is my colleague Archita Faustmann, who is with us here, our human rights policy advisor, who is also the main author of that new guidance paper, which we are going to talk about today. My name is Bernd Steimann. I'm coordinating all development policy work for Helvetas abroad and in Switzerland. But most importantly, we have three colleagues with us today from Laos and from Albania who are going to talk about their practical experiences and their lessons learned, takeaways from engaging with European human rights mechanisms. We have Yengkong Volavong and Kampan Surivong, two project managers from Helvetas Laos, who will talk about their engagement. And we have Valbona Karakachi, Regional Senior Advisor with Helvetas in the Western Balkans and a highly experienced advocate. So we are very pleased to have a nice team today for this webinar, which will bring you practical experience, hands-on experience from two very different countries who have made their experiences and are happy to share. On a technical note, as usual, you will have noticed at the meeting that this webinar will be recorded. This is for internal purposes only. The video will be made available on the Helvetas intranet in case you want to watch it again or you want to share it with your colleagues to watch and learn. Please, as I said before already, keep your microphone muted at all times so you don't interfere with the presentations. You can close your camera, you can leave it open, it's up to you. We advise to close it If you're having connectivity problems, the best thing is always to leave Teams and to rejoin again. In most cases, the problem will be solved. The chat is open for you, so please add your comments and questions during the webinar in the chat, and we will make sure to take them up at the Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. You can also ask direct questions during the Q&A session, but the chat is there to post your questions and remarks during the webinar. So why are we having this webinar? Most of you, or many of you, will know that Helvetus has started to advocate through international human rights mechanisms some 5 years ago. That was when we published our first guidance paper on advocating through the UN human rights system. The guidance paper has been updated a couple of times since then, and most importantly, it has been used and successfully applied by a number of Helvetus country programs and projects like Laos, Myanmar, Nepal, Tajikistan, Albania, most recently also Bangladesh and Haiti, who have used different mechanisms with the United Nations human rights mechanisms to advocate on various issues of concern. That includes water and sanitation, migrants' rights, civic space, and others. Most recently also climate justice in the case of Helvetus Bangladesh. So a whole range of thematic areas where they actively advocated together with local CSO partners through the United Nations mechanisms. But we also came to realize that there are many more human rights mechanisms and opportunities available outside the United Nations. And this is why we started to investigate, to learn, to analyze and see what else is there. What other mechanisms are there which we as civil society actors could actively use for policy dialogue and advocacy? And this is why we have now come up with a brand new guidance paper on advocating through the European human rights system, because this system also offers plenty of opportunities to address various issues of concern. And this is not only for countries who are like either European countries or even EU member states, but for all sorts of countries, including from Asia, Africa, and other continents. And we have prepared this guidance paper just to show you, as with the other paper, what are the different mechanisms, the different avenues we can use together with civil society partners to advocate on various issues of concern. So in this webinar, we are going to take you through that paper. We give you a brief summary of the paper, what's in there, what are the main elements you need to know, and then we are going to illustrate some of these elements with the concrete examples from Laos and Albania. And with this, I hand over to my colleague Archita, who is going to give you a brief introduction into that new paper.
Thank you, Bern, and thank you for the introduction. And I'm glad to be sharing this paper with you today. So why we address EU human rights mechanisms, we will see in today's webinar. The reason why we started to focus on the EU human rights advocacy is also because it's quite important that EU systematically addresses human rights in all its bilateral contracts at all levels. So that gives to civil to people, actors like us, to take part in these mechanisms. The promotion and protection of human rights is a priority of the European Union, both within the EU and in relation with the third countries. And EU institutions and member states also advocate human rights protection worldwide in a structured and coherent manner. Can you switch to the next slide, please? So here we can see there are three main institutions when we talk about European human rights system. One is the Council of Europe, the second is European Union, and the third is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So if we look very briefly at each of us, I mean, I will not go too much into the details. The Council of Europe, which we also call COE, was established in 1949 through the Treaty of London. At present, it has 46 member states. Russia just became the first member to be excluded due to its invasion of Ukraine. So this was on 16th March 2022. Russia was out of COE Institute. Uh, the COE was started initially as a forum to discuss common problems of the European nations. But then it started to shift focus, addressing human rights issues within the Europe. And the most important thing to remember is the European Convention on Protection of Human Rights, which we all know, it's quite a famous instrument, is actually the part of the Council of Europe. Uh, then we move to the European Union, the second institution. So European Union is a separate entity compared to the other two. It was started or it was initiated as the regional economic and political alliance for a single European market and was established in 1993. It has only 27 European member states. So the members of COE are not the same members of European Union. And the human rights within the European Union are a very important aspect. It's an integral part of the EU's work, which we will see later in our webinar. And briefly about Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as this is the main forum within the Europe to address peace, security, and human rights. So in Europe and Central Asia. Again, it has 57 participating states, which are mainly from the Europe, but also includes US, Canada, and some Asian countries. Now, each of these three systems have distinct bodies and mechanisms. So in the next slide, we will explore each of them. So if you can just switch the slide, please. So here we can see Council of Europe. The main institution of Council of Europe are European Court of Human Rights, European Committee of Social Rights, Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, Commissioner for Human Rights, and Conference of International Non-Governmental Organizations. Can you switch the next slide, please? Now, here if we see, I haven't put the European Court of Human Rights. There is a reason for that, because we are a development INGO. We don't directly work on human rights violations as the organizations like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch would do. And European Court of Human Rights is really a court which addresses human rights issues. But for us, the most important instruments would be the European Committee on Social Rights and the other ones which I mentioned earlier. Now, European Committee on Social Right is it's available to only those members who have signed the European Charter of Social Rights. It engages through two different ways. One is the reporting system, and another is the collective complaint procedure. Just very brief idea about how it works is the reporting system is like those countries within the Europe. So this is for not non-EU countries. So those countries within the Europe have to report on their compliance with the European Social Charter every year. But unlike the UN mechanisms where you report on the whole treaty, under this, there are like 4 thematics. The countries can choose one of these thematics, which includes employment, health, labor rights, children, and migrants. So the member state can choose one of these thematic and report each year only on that one thematic. The civil society also has an entry point there in terms of CSOs can submit the report, comments and information on the states to the committee. Then there is collective complaint procedure, which is like for the NGOs also. But this procedure exists only if the instrument there is non-compliance of the European Social Charter. So only on that collective complaint procedure exists. Now we switch to the Commissioner for Human Rights. Now, please remember that the Commissioner for Human Rights is a separate mandate from the EU Commissioner. So Commissioner for Human Rights under the COE is applicable to all COE member states. It does the country visits and thematic reporting, similar to what also the UN special rapporteurs do. The only difference is that the Commissioner for Human Rights, which reports back, can you switch to the next slide, the slide above? One more above. Yeah, on the chart. Yeah. So if you see the Commissioner of Human Rights that reports to the Parliamentary Assembly, which is made of the members of parliament from the member states. So the chances of his recommendations are taken up are much higher than it would be in the UN mechanisms. So now you can go back to the slide again. Thank you. If you want to see in detail, our paper has more details on each of these instruments, how they work, or mandates. If you go to the next slide, please. And then there is something called conference. Sorry, my voice is just going bad. The conference of INGOs is more than 300 INGOs that bring the civil society perspective into the work of all the COE organs. And this is quite important for the policy level dialogue. Another important instrument is the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, where our colleagues from Albania has gained valuable experience. So I will not go much into the detail, but hand it over to my colleague Valbona, who can share her experience, how they worked with Congress of Local and Regional Authorities. So Valbona, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Ankita. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm Valbona. I'm based in Western Balkan, and I'm going to share with you, as Ankita says, a practical experience showcase of working with an important institution of Council of Europe, as it is Congress of Local and Regional Authorities. But starting first with the why this is an important mechanism for making advocacy work. There are four important reasons. Number one, because our work is not just technical, but it's even political. Therefore, Council of Europe and Congress represents a political body with a lot of power. Number two is the representative function, the legitimacy. And legitimacy is not only political, it's even about numbers. So there are 46 European states member of the Congress and 200,000 authorities. So there is a lot of legitimacy around the Congress as a body. Number three are our values. When we talk for advocacy, we esteem and base our work in the values Helvetas has. And it's about the scope of work Congress exercises, which is strengthening local and regional democracy and doing it mainly through dialogue and consultation. And finally, it has an instrument, a strong instrument in its hand, which is the European Charter of Local Self-Government, and all member states of Council of Europe and Congress have adopted as part of their internal legal framework such a chart. Using it with a watchdog function, it's a way of making advocacy work. So these are the 5 whys of being involved with Congress. What's about Albania history with Council of Europe? Next slide, please. Albania got part of Council of Europe on 95, and it signed the chart for local self-government in 2000. This is important because the story I will share dates on 2013. So we had like a 3 years experience with exercising using the chart as country when we started our advocacy case. Country is represented on bodies of Congress through a national delegation. We have 61 local governments in Albania and 12 regions. And a way of being represented as country on the institutional setup of Congress is mainly through local elected authorities, but quite often countries choose to send there as well representatives of local government associations. And here it starts our case. Next slide, please. So at that time, in 2013, we were supporting Albanian Association of Local Authorities on their function. I guess this is you are familiar with such structure in different countries that exists. It brings together elected representatives to advocate towards national government for the decentralization. It provides services to its members through capacity building for important reforms and so on. So Helvetas in 2013 was supporting Association of Local Authorities to exercise such function. However, it happened that due to the highly polarized political context, association split along party lines. So from one association, which advocated for the interest of all local governments, we were confronted with a situation of two associations split along party lines. So the question was how to provide our assistance in a legitimate way and in a non-partisan way. We started different efforts like initiating informal platforms, trying to talk for political legitimacy with two associations, showcasing a situation of potential collaboration between the two on technical issues, or even conditioning donors' funding with the collaboration between the two. So these were different entry points of solving this question mark and bringing legitimacy back. Please, next slide. While we were trying through different entry points, we thought, why not to use the Council of Europe and specifically Congress as a catalyst of change and bringing associations together. Bear in mind the fact that Helvetas mainly provided technical assistance. We were not really recognized as a political actor, while the problem was really political. So allying with an international framework like the one of Congress of Local Authorities would somehow bring in our advocacy efforts the missing ingredient, the political dimension of our support. So we try to use different entry points, taking a facilitation role, but going jointly with Council of Europe. The slide here represents different entry points. But there are three big keywords on finding entry points. One keyword is processes. Use the processes of international framework. And the processes in this case were like every country is supposed to prepare an annual report on implementation of Council of Europe and chart of local autonomy. So you could mobilize it and prepare a proposal to Committee of Ministers with recommendation. So that is a known process. Second keyword is use institutions. There is in every country member of Council of Europe, there is a permanent representation body There is this national delegation in Council of Europe and Congress. So you start to discuss with these institutions and involve them in your processes. And number three, politics does not exclude being technical. Council of Europe has as well its instruments of technical instruments, experts with a lot of experience and interlocutors. So we try to use all the three: processes, experts, and institutions as entry point for our advocacy work. Next slide, please. Where it led through. It led into an observation of Council of Europe. That's how the process of Congress works through. Congress can issue an observation and recommendation. So from a small problem of association, you build an international case, and that's the power of international framework. So the observation of the Council of Europe Congress specifically was that partisan behavior of local government leaders was preventing them speaking with a unified voice. And this has implication on the decentralization framework of Albania. After this observation, it came the recommendation of Congress, which somehow suggested that efforts should be put on initiating and building platform of pluralist dialogue. So the recommendation led to other initiatives. Just to say before going in our learnings that you might ask, did we manage really to merge the associations in one? These are very complex political processes. My answer is no. We still are trying on that direction. But still, it was initiated another platform thanks to this observation and recommendation called Consultative Council, where local and national governments would get together, including both associations, to talk about decentralization. So the pluralist dialogue was made possible thanks to the use of international framework without aiming in short term to merge the two associations in one. What are our three takeaways? Number one, using Council of Europe mechanism, it's an excellent venue for bringing parties into a dialogue. And governance is a lot about dialogue and alternative ideas. Number two, we are used as organization to bring and recognize to bring technical expertise. But technical expertise is not enough. It needs to be blended with political dimensions, and Council of Europe, Congress provides these well-blended successful entry point. And number three, upscale technical solutions and liaise them on with international frameworks makes our position stronger. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valpona, for your insight. It was very interesting to hear your experience. Now we move to the next institution. If you can switch the slide, please. So if you look at this chart, I mean, we saw how the Council of Europe institutions and mandates, what kind of entry points we have. Now here, if you see, there is this chart of the European Union and all of its mechanisms. This looks quite a lot. And I mean, yes, there are so many institutions. It's very difficult to find your own ways. But we would just like to simplify in a way. So all of these institutions are applicable for the 27 European Union member states. But then within this, there are some institutions or some mandates which can also be used by the non-EU countries, so non-EU member states. This is possible because under the European Union, there is something called human rights clause. So every European Union bilateral treaty has a human rights clause. And also there are other ways where where the European Union addresses human rights, and that comes within this body called European External Services, Foreign Affairs Council, and all of these other mandates, which are for the non-EU countries. We will go through each of them one by one. Just to give you a brief idea, I mean, the more details we have is in our EU human rights paper, which can be referred separately. So first is this human rights clause in the bilateral treaties. So that provides a framework for opening a political dialogue between the EU and the country of engagement. This is in relation with the European Union and the third countries. The second would be the thematic guidelines on human rights. So the EU thematic guidelines on human rights, they are the practical and pragmatic tools for understanding the EU's position on a specific thematic. So they represent opportunities for the CSOs where the country, where the EU is present, to hold dialogue with the EU delegations and the member embassies, and hold them, like, kind of encourage the implementation of those thematic guidelines. The third is the EU Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy, that provides practical and concrete actions to be taken by the EU delegations. And at various stages of the action plan, civil society is actually also invited to give input on the future actions of the EU action plans. The third is the EU, the next one is the EU's annual report on human rights and democracy. This is the first point of information on the EU's action on specific thematic and country. So say, for example, you are country X, or just take an example, Vietnam or Laos or Myanmar. You want to see what EU is actually doing in this country. So you go to this annual report on human rights, and there it's listed the EU's priorities, actions on those specific countries. So you can get an idea of how EU is addressing human rights for that specific country. If you switch to the next, if we go to the next one, that is the EU delegations. So EU delegations, they play a key role in policy shaping, as they have the leadership in drafting the human rights and country strategies for the country of their presence, so where they are present. And being connected with the EU delegations and feeding information from the ground, that can have a significant impact for the future direction of EU's policy on that specific country. In non-EU countries, also the EU delegations are the first point of contact for the local NGOs. Then EU country roadmaps for the engagement with civil society is instrumental to develop a common strategic framework for the engagement of EU delegations and member states with civil society at country level. And this is with a view to improving the impact, predictability, and visibility of EU actions. Then there is EU focal point, human rights focal point. So every EU delegation has a human rights focal point who is in charge for coordination on human rights and CSOs on the specific thematic issues of human rights, democracy, civil society, and gender equality. And they are also the main drivers of the implementation and mainstreaming of the EU policies, programs, financing instruments in these thematic areas. And lastly, there is something called EU human rights dialogues. So human rights dialogue is an important instrument through which the EU conducts regular and intensive exchanges on human rights challenges with individual countries which it has bilateral relations. So on this EU human rights dialogue, we actually have made an experience, or Helvetas, our colleagues in Laos have gained a good experience in engaging with this mandate. And this is why, I would also like to now hand over to our colleagues from Laos, Vienkone and Kampan. They will present their experience from the Laos on human rights dialogue. So I hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Shita.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, today we have 3 people that the country director here at the meeting, so he asked us to present this for you. So for the Laos, we also have participation and also engage in the human rights, participatory with the EU. So for our engagement in 2022 with the EU, mainly is we have been invited to participate in the EU-Laos Human Rights Dialogue in 2022. The structure of the overall dialogue for 2022 was to address the implementation of the recommendation that given to the Laos countries according to the previous Universal Periodic Review. And in 2022, the Heritage Law has provided the UPR recommendation on the following thematic cluster. One about the cooperation with the international mechanism. The second is about poverty alleviation. The third, rights of women and girls. Fourth, enabling environment for civil societies. And the last one is about the business and human rights. So the next step, please. The next slide. Yeah. The project we apply on the right-based approach and foster new opportunity for civic engagement and constructive advocacy dialogue with the government. In addition, we also implement the local governance and social accountability with the local government organization at the community level. This is the pilot project that we are implement. We implement the EU funded project currently, like a GBV or Just Signal project, which focus on gender-based violence, women voice, just signals, and nutrition governance in the northern province of Laos. Through the EU human rights mechanism, we could share our field experience and finding from the report to our EU funded projects from time to time. Yeah, the next slide, please. Yeah, the observation, the EU human rights dialogue provide an open and safe space for advocacy and to the Laos civil society and also international organization. And the EU official channels, for instance, human rights and dialogue can be instrument for the constructive advocacy at the national level. During the dialogues, we realized that the thematic scope was limited. The nature of the dialogue is that not allows the fundamental issues such as the freedoms of assembly and speech, including protest in Laos. There was no official feedback to Laos CSO from the EU delegations after the civil society consultation workshop that organized in 2022. Which at least 5 consultation workshop with the Laos civil society has been made in 2072. And after that, the Action EU Laos Government Dialogue, the recommendations from the EU to the governments were rather broad and focused mainly on the government's engagement with the UN human rights mechanism, not too much specific on the area that to be focused. Yeah, the next slide, please. Yeah, for the takeaway, human rights dialogue should be held on an on basis and would be linked to the pending recommendation of the UN treaty bodies and also UPR reviews, as well as the preparation of the next UPR in 2025. The EU finance support allows and draw the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights and the civil society organization, local authorities must be increased in the future for the last context. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kampon, for.
Okay, one more slide, the last slide, sorry. More co-funding that would be enable for CSO to pursue their own strategy, direction, and advance in the localization agenda. The funding modalities should be encourage civil society to pool force for advocacy and should be foster regional and international networks. EU can explore new ways to better engage with other types of civil society beyond the classic NGO, such as civic movement, social enterprise, and other human rights groups and activists. Yeah, that is all from Laos. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kampong, for your interesting insights. And here we can also see the synergies between the UN mechanisms and the EU mechanisms, because although the instrument was the EU instruments, the human rights dialogue, but the EU actually address how UPR recommendations can be taken up or can be implemented by the concerning state. So there is a kind of synergy and harmony between the EU and the UN human rights mechanisms that was quite visible through this experience. If you switch to the next slide, please. Then we move to the next one. This is the OSCE, which is also Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It is the world's largest security-oriented intergovernmental organization. And the main work it does is to resolve conflicts. So within its mandate, OSCE addresses a wide range of security-related concerns that include arms control, confidence and security building measures, human rights, national minorities, democratization, etc. The OSCE has an observer status with the UN and is considered as a regional partner of the UN in maintaining international peace and security according to the chapter 8 of the UN Charter. So an OSCE field cooperation operations also cooperate closely with the UN agencies and missions. And since the work of the OSCE is to engage states on peace building and de-escalation of conflicts, which is the political work, it has kept CSO's engagement only in a limited role. So, but however, during the Swiss chairmanship of OSCE in 2014, efforts were made to enhance the dialogue with the civil society in OSCE regions with OSCE institutions. So OSCE parallel civil society events on the eve of OSCE Ministerial Council meetings could be an important entry point for the civil society organizations. I mean, I would not go too much into the detail on the OSCE how it works and all, because the main work which we saw is mainly to the security and peace in the Europe. OSCE has 57 member states, which are mainly from the Europe and Central Asia. So it is also kind of a bigger reach than it has in terms of the Council of Europe and European Union, which has 27 member states. But yeah. And then it has these two main bodies that it works through, and which also subdivides into the Office for Democratic Institution and Human Rights, Representative on Freedom of the Media, High Commissioner on National Minority, and the Secretary General. So with this, I would hand over to Bernd for any questions or discussions that we have. Do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, thank you. We have a couple of questions, even though one of them has already been answered, I believe. The question from Aimin Tun regarding the linkages between the European and the United Nations human rights system. Archita has just explored this, and I think the example from Laos has very nicely illustrated how one system builds on the other, how the EU Human Rights Dialogue refers to the recommendations from the UPR. If you want to know more about the UPR, please go refer to our United Nations Human Rights System guidance paper. I would just take the liberty to add one question to that specific one before we come to the other ones. Now, if we had to choose between the EU human rights system or the United Nations human rights system with limited resources of our project, of our civil society partners, we want to address a certain issue through advocacy. If we had to choose between the European and the United Nations human rights system, what would you recommend? Maybe the question goes to Archita or anyone else with experience. I'm not even sure whether there is a proper answer to that question. Or does it depend on the topic we want to address?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it depends on the topic and also which geography we are addressing to. So say if you are in the country which has closed civic space, maybe EU mechanisms are more relevant in terms of that there is a direct contact with the EU delegations in the countries through the human rights focal point. Human rights dialogue is more open, but EU has more kind of safety features inbuilt in their instruments and mandates, which allows civil society's role on the more sustainable manner and also more confidential manner. UN human rights mechanisms are relevant too, especially the UPR review, but you also have to remember it comes only every 5 years. So if there is something in between, you have the mechanism like UN special rapporteurs. So I mean, if there are EU delegations in the countries where you work, explore those entry points first because they anyways work in harmony. And EU might be able to put more pressure or kind of, bring the issues more closer to the UN mandates. Yeah, so that is how I would, I would imagine, I can answer on that. Thanks.
Okay, and thank you, Archita. I think the following two questions are a bit related to each other and go into the same direction you already indicated regarding confidentiality. A question from Patrick who asks whether the Lao government knows which CSO and human rights activists are actually in contact or exchange with EU bodies and persons. So how confidential is this human rights dialogue? How safe are you as a CSO? And then maybe just related to it, the question from Yen Chan, who asks, which of these mechanisms do not require us to disclose our organizational name, country program to the concerned government? So which of these mechanisms are really confidential so that we can also engage with CSOs? Maybe I give the first question regarding Laos back to Kampan, to the team in Vientiane, and then Archita might complement. Kampan, do you want to respond to that first question regarding, right now we can hear you, yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for your question. Yeah, of course, when we organize a consultation meeting, the Lao government has invited Lao CSO. In Laos, we have one CSO we call Lao CCO, Lao CSO coordination network that they have grouping all the Lao CSO organization in Laos. So they will assign a representative to participate in the meeting. So during the meeting, of course, they have prepared the question and also the input that related to CSO, and the CSO also provide the recommendation, including take actions, some recommendation to take action as well. And mostly the issue that related or consultation in the meeting is almost about the socio-economic, poverty alleviation, development and environment, good governance and rule of laws, and vulnerable group, which the support of the government should be reached on mostly about in the remote areas of the last people, including the human rights, children rights, violence in Laos. Yeah. So I answered your question.
Thank you, Kampan. Maybe Archita, you want to comment on this regarding which mechanisms allow for confidentiality or to disclose your organizational affiliation and which ones not?
So regarding confidentiality, EU has something called this program called Human Rights Defenders Program. So as per that, EU mechanisms can provide confidentiality to the CSOs or also the human rights defenders. But I mean, every time you do advocacy on human rights, you always have to remember this thing that if you do a joint submission or if you do a submission on the thematic issue, that can be addressed, or the EU delegation or even the UN mandates would have possibility to keep it confidential. But as long as if you want to address individual cases, those cannot be addressed without the names being disclosed because we are talking about individual cases. So there is a difference on what we want to address and what impact we want at the end. So yes, as long as you do joint submissions, as long as you keep on the general thematic, it could be confidential, it could be also kind of just feeding the information. But be careful with not submitting the names, not submitting the individual cases if you don't want to be exposed on a certain level. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Archita. There's a next very specific question from Andrea Sonntag from Welthungerhilfe. Have you been using the Maastricht principles on extraterritorial obligations in the area of economic, social and cultural rights as a reference in your work? And if so, with what experience? I think that goes back to Archita again.
Thank you, Andrea, and nice seeing you here. No, we haven't we haven't used Maastricht principles on extraterritorial obligations. So far, we've not done as a reference in our work, but it would be good for us to implore. We can check on this input. Yeah, thank you.
There are two more questions, but I take the liberty first to ask a question to Valbona because all the questions were about Laos so far. And I really liked what you said, Valbona, regarding the combination of technical and political work. If we have a project, we engage with this Council of Municipalities. It is important to strengthen their capacities, their abilities, and so on, to network. But it's also important to start a political dialogue and engage with them in the exchange with a European institution. I was wondering, however, whether that could also be counterproductive in a certain case when you work with that Council of Municipalities and then you kind of force them now to have to engage with the Council of Europe, you have to engage in all these political dialogue. Isn't that a bit kind of an external pressure, which might also lead your local government partners to close up and say, okay, no, this is not what we want. We don't want to engage with these mechanisms.
I mean, working politically is always delicate, and it might raise the question you put, but as well other questions. I try to answer your question by combining it with another question of attribution from Natalia on the chat, you know. So, look, so I say we use the present processes and we use the present institutional setups. So basically, what we tried to influence is not the action. It's exercising commitments in a certain serious way. So no new actions, but exercising existing commitments. So associations are part of our national delegation into a Congress of Local Authorities. So the question is very practical. Who goes there to represent the country on the national delegation? It's a practical question. So you use it to start discussing and influencing. So somehow it's changing behavior by using existing processes and thinking in an alternative way. What we do in this case is, and that's what we attribute to our intervention, is mobilization, engagement, aiming a behavior change, a less bipartisan and more unified voice, but not really conditioning it, but using existing processes. Maybe it was said in my presentation, and that was not really pushed from us, that we conditioned the funding. So there you enter in the sphere of conditionalities. But on that point, you don't do it alone. You build alliances, and only once all donors present in the country were ready to put such conditionalities, then we were part of a broader alliance. So risk mitigation, build network, align with others, and use existing mandates and existing processes.
Thank you, Valbona, also for taking up the question from Natalia. That was a really nice addition. We're a bit conscious of time. We have just a few minutes left, so I'd like to take up the last questions from the chat. And thank you to Violaine, who has also added some thoughts on the situation in Laos and the EU human rights dialogue. And exactly on that topic, there was a second question from Patrick, who asks, again, to the Lao team, whether Helvetus Laos was disappointed by the EU position in exchange with the Lao government. Would you have wished for a stronger and clearer position by the EU in that specific moment back in 2022? Or is this just what can be realistically expected under the given circumstances?
Yeah, just back to the question, the second question of Patrick. Of course, EU in Laos is also the actors in playing the role in treating the human rights issue, but the issue is not only the EU, but it depends on the issue that concern to the government, which is sometimes is very sensitive, sometimes it's very broad, and the government's also difficult to deal with that recommendation due to the dragging up resource, the political context. So some issue, example for the recommendation in 2020, we received more than 276 recommendation, but Lao government take action only accepted only 160 recommendation only. So that some recommendation not directly related to. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think I just would like to add one just summarize this one little thing. It's like we must remember that the EU is not going to kind of sit and make the government do things forcibly, or also through this human rights dialogue, there are limitations. So of course it has to stay very much in the limitation, and it's in a closed civic space, even if it is just kind of pushing government to speak on certain commitments it made at the international level, then that itself is kind of gives us an opening. So this is also the shortcomings of the regional mechanisms, that the limits can be pushed only in a very limited manner.
Okay, thank you, Archita. And with this, we are coming to an end. We hope that we could respond to all of the questions in the chat. If not, please send us an email, but we tried our level best. Thank you very much for all the contributions in the chat. That was a very lively and interesting discussion. Before we close, just to remind you of the options for support we offer around these topics. If you go to our intranet Pamoja and to the Advocacy Hub, Departments Directorate Advocacy, you will find all kinds of resources, including an own page on advocating through human rights mechanisms, where you will find the 2 guidance papers and many more references and resources. The easiest way, however, to ask for support or just learn more is to contact us, write ideally to Archita and or me, and we will be very happy to provide support to direct you to the right pages and discuss with you what can be done in case you want to advocate and use these mechanisms. With this, we are coming to an end of this webinar. We would like to thank you very much for attending, to all the participants, but a very big thank you to the 2 presenters, Kampan and Valbona, who has given us really interesting insights from 2 vastly different countries, but using the kind of same mechanisms. That was really interesting. So thanks a lot for taking your time and sharing your experiences. That was much appreciated. So thank you for attending. We hope to see you soon in our next webinar, and have a nice day, avoid the heat, and take care. Bye-bye.